we're still expecting a few more people. So maybe we'll do a slow roll into things. While we get started, Jeff, could I call on you just to kind of tell the story of how we were able to get Rachael here?
Yeah. So Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press announced this local legal initiative program in 2019, and they opened up kind of a competition among all the states and said they would be placing 5 attorneys, 1 attorney in each of 5 states. And so we applied along with a joint application with the Press Association, the Broadcasters Association, and the Colorado Media Project, and we won. So we're so
good,
happy we did.
Good application writing, Jeff. Thank you for doing that.
We emphasize some.
Lark put in a celebration emoji.
Yeah, I mean, we emphasize some things, some of the systemic issues that we have in Colorado, and the fact that we don't have any kind of administrative appeal when you're denied records and you think you're wrongly denied. And so that was one of the things that, here you have to sue in order to get anywhere. And there, hadn't been a lot of that. There's been a little bit more lately, but it's been hard to fight a lot of these battles.
Thank you for that background and for your continued work in front of and behind the scenes on trying to help us all get the records and the information and the rights that journalists and the rest of the public deserve. So I think we'll go ahead and let Rachael get started. So this is welcome if you haven't been to a collab training session or event before. We're trying to do these at least once a month, and our list of requests is growing, so we may wind up doing them more often, and you can pick and choose what's most valuable to you. We are recording this so that those who couldn't make it on this Friday afternoon can watch it. And Rachael is going to, I'll let her introduce herself. I think most of you already know her because we've been so excited to get her here. But she's going to walk through how you can access the work that she's doing for you and for your newsroom. So with that, Rachael, welcome.
Thank you. And Laura, I want to say kudos and thanks to you and Allison for setting this up. I know that quite a bit can go into just, putting a training together, even though you guys do it so well and so flawlessly. So thanks so much. And, just picking up off of what Jeff was saying, yes, I'm really excited to be here for the reasons he stated and for the reasons that I was able to come here in the proposal. And, I've in the time I've been here, I've certainly noticed that working with journalists, because it's so difficult to get records and to be able to just have the resources for someone who can step up and sue on their behalf, it's pretty challenging. And I think, one of the things I'm also seeing is just folks working with a town clerk or with another record administrator to kind of get the records. There seems to be a lot of erring on the side of, well, I'll narrow my request and see if they'll accept my request. But, in doing that, you're missing out on getting the records you might really, really want. And they might be denying you access to these records for reasons that are not under the statute or acceptable under the law. So I just maybe wanted to start with that, a little bit of a primer, and kind of also let you know that that's why I'm here, is to certainly help with the litigation aspect. And I've been able to work with Jeff really fluidly in that he's, you know, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, because Jeff has been a really great partner. He's the first line of defense for all of your public records requests. And then if they, you know, need to be elevated to a level of litigation or pre-litigation, that's where I'll step in. And I've also worked with Steve Zansberg, who's been a support and someone who obviously a lot of you guys know has been doing this work for years and years. So I'm just happy to have you guys as partners and work with you as well. I put together a small presentation and I can certainly share that with you just so we can, I mean, maybe just get started with a little bit more about what I do. So I'm hoping I'm doing this right and you can see it correctly. Yeah, okay. And I didn't introduce myself. I just kind of went on a quick tangent. Yes, I'm the local legal initiative attorney for Colorado. I'm actually originally from Colorado. I'm not there now. I'm from living in DC. And before coming to RCFP, I was a journalist. I worked in broadcast and print media. In Colorado, I worked for Stars for a little bit as a producer and was able to move in many different directions within media, but also went to law school there and have been doing litigation work in DC for the last couple of years. So working with journalists is certainly a passion of mine, and I'm glad I'm able to do it here with you all and come back home to Colorado. So let's start with the work we do. And I'm sorry, this is kind of a long way and a lot of folks may already know what we do essentially, but primarily what the Reporters Committee of Freedom of the Press does is we provide pro bono legal assistance to journalists. You know, that primarily relates to First Amendment matters, press freedom issues, freedom of information access, court access issues, a lot, you know, anything related to news gathering, where you might have, you know, public records requests, those kind of issues I also work on. And, you know, there's quite a bit of legal resources to protect First Amendment freedoms and news gatherings. We also provide quite a bit of resources to journalists that are related to First Amendment work. And I'll get into that a little bit later on. But we as RCFP, we serve news organizations, we serve reporters, we serve editors, documentary film, filmmakers and freelancers, bloggers, the whole range in the work we do. And Jeff talked about the local legal initiative, so I won't get into that too much. It is part of a grant that was funded by the Knight Foundation. Like Jeff said, right now, there's 5 states that are a part of the local legal initiative. It's Colorado, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Oregon. And so, you know, we are acting as kind of an extension of the legal work RCFP is already doing, but we focus on a particular jurisdiction. With that, with RCFP, so I am considered an RCFP attorney, but I'm guided by specific litigation priorities and also internal processes. That won't sound as wonky when I go over it, but just so folks know and are aware. And also, we also work with other partner organizations, as I mentioned before. So I thought it would be helpful finally to get in and talk a little bit about how we could be helpful and some of our services could be helpful and be resources to you folks working out in Colorado. Okay, so RCFP, okay, so some of the services we provide, why don't I go through that? We provide a kind of an array of services, a list of services, pre-publication legal services. We provide them to freelance journalists and also independent filmmakers. Currently, we have a partnership with the International Documentary Fund, and let me see right here, and work with several other documentary filmmakers. Currently, actually, we do work with freelance documentary filmmakers as well. And in that capacity, we do, of course, court access services. So if you're trying to get public records, we do that kind of work. We do amicus curiae support, where we will write friendly briefs to the court. If there's a current legal issue that might be really relevant to journalists and what journalists are working on, we might intervene and write a supportive brief to the court. That's some of the other work we do. And let's move on to some of our resources. So some of the resources we provide a set of free online guides. One of those guides is called the Open Government Guide. And that is a complete compendium of information on every state's open records and open meeting laws. In Colorado, we have a very specific guidebook that's really helpful. So if you are, if you've got a public records request that was just denied and you want to figure out whether or not an exception is applied or applies correctly from what a clerk or a records administrator has said, you can take a look at that guide and, just have access to information that will be useful as far as whether or not that exemption applies. We also have a press freedom on tribal lands guide, which is a primer on press freedom issues on tribal lands. I know in Colorado, of course, there are, some of those issues might arise. And so that would be a great resource to access if you are working with the tribal groups or if you're a member of a tribal media. We also have a guide that's called FOIA Wiki, which is a free and collaborative resource on the Federal Freedom of Information Act. And you can access that right here where it says FOIA Wiki. And this is a guide that is really helpful if you're a journalist and you're looking to get records from a federal agency. So, with FOIA, if you're looking to get documents from the Department of Justice, from the Department of Interior, from the Department of Education, and so on, that's a really good guide to help you and assist you with making those requests. Let's see. Our second group of resources. So we also have a reporter's privilege guide. And this is helpful if you are being compelled to testify or you have to, or you've been asked to disclose certain sources of information in court. This guide will kind of help walk you through a little bit of that information and how and what your rights are related to whether or not you do have to testify or not. So that is a really good and useful guide if you find that you're in a position where you're being forced or asked to testify or disclose sources and information. The pre-publication review guide is a vetting guide. It's basically pre-publication review is a vetting process in which we'll review news articles, scripts, footage from a film that you're working on, possibly to address, a legal concern before you are publishing a story or a film. And the goal there is to reduce your legal risk. So moving forward, you would not potentially want to be, being sued for defamation or any privacy torts that might come up in the long work you've done on your film. And earlier I mentioned that we did partner with some documentary film groups. and we partner with them. So there's one called the Fund for Investigative Journalism, the International Documentary Association, and the Freelance Investigative Reporters and Editors Group. We partner with them as well under the pre-publication guide and vetting work that we do at RCFP. And there's also many other resources and guides that are online that might be useful. And I can add those to the chat as well. Maybe when we're doing the question and answer period.
That's a good idea, Rachel. While you're going to the next slide, I can offer too that if you want, we can share your slides with folks, and we may be able to figure out a way to put some of these resources up on the website too, so people have access to them more permanently.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
I know one that might
we'll
be
figure
really,
that out.
Okay, sounds good. I think one that might be really relevant now is probably our guide on COVID and how you are trying to pry records loose during COVID. You know, there's been a lot of delays lately with agencies because of COVID, and there's some specific tips and information that RCFP has put together that may be helpful for getting those records pried loose. And then on top of that, RCFP, one of the great resources we have is a legal defense hotline. And that's available to working journalists and media lawyers 7 days a week. You know, some of the assistance we've provided thus far are related to major events such as, you know, elections, around the presidential inauguration. We had availability for people to call on the hotline, political party conventions, and we create special hotline events or special events around special events. If you need assistance, you can call our hotline. For emergencies, you can call our 1-800 number, which is right at the bottom of the screen. I think you can see, but you can call and get assistance as well. One of the ways it can be used is if a Colorado journalist calls, usually that journalist will be transferred to me, and I will assist with that hotline call. But if there's a time, and usually we do this during normal business hours, but if you know, by chance we're not available, then you can call the emergency line, especially if you're in a critical situation as a journalist. You might be covering protests and you find yourself arrested. You could call the 1-800 number, and we actually have criminal defense attorneys in Colorado set up to assist. So I feel like that's been a really vital resource for a lot of RCFP attorneys and a lot of reporters nationally. So that's a good resource to keep in mind that we offer. Well, let's see. Now, finally, after this a little bit of a long way into the crux of this presentation, with how I can help. You know, before I reiterated that what kind of work we do First Amendment litigation. And under that banner of First Amendment litigation, we do amicus curiae work. We do public records work, court access work, pre-publication review, anti-SLAPP assistance as well, libel and privacy assistance as well. We do some defamation work. It's limited just because with defamation, usually a lot of discovery might be involved. So in some cases we can be a little bit limited with resources, but it is an option where we could find help for you if you feel like you're in a position where you're a journalist who's being sued for defamation. Or certainly an outlet for you to come to and ask about how we can be helpful. So that's why we rarely do defamation defense work, but it is something that is available, and we can direct you to somebody who might also be helpful. And I'm sure there are, you know, I know Steve may as well do that kind of work, and other journalists in Colorado as well. The other type of way that RCFP can be useful, and one of the reasons why I wanted to also do this chat was because a couple of journalists have said, well, how can we use you? And so one of the other ways you guys can reach out to me and use me is if you want a legal training for your newsroom. Not only do I give presentations, I recently gave a presentation to Colorado College on Cora, and how journalists use Cora, how journalists use FOIA, and how they may use CCJRA. But we also did a training recently about covering protests and witnessing crimes with Steve Zansberg. And that was about what your rights are and, some practical tips if you're a journalist and you're facing, a warrant to search records in your newsroom related to an incident that had recently happened. Like if you were reporting on the protest and someone, law enforcement came and said, hey, we've got a warrant to search your newsroom. What are your rights from that perspective? That's some of the work we also assist with. Let's see. And we can also work, with your newsroom to provide specific trainings. One of the LLI attorneys does trainings on tribal law, which might be interesting and useful for your newsrooms. We also have a FOIA guru who knows FOIA inside and out and can provide a lot of assistance to your newsrooms if you have journalists who are interested in looking at federal records and want access to those records. We have a really good FOIA guru who can be helpful with that type of information as well. And also occasionally we weigh in on state and policy issues. We're not a lobbyist group, so we are limited in some ways because we're a 501c3. So we can't directly lobby, but a lot of our reporters and a lot of our attorneys have been assisting if testimony would be required for certain matters, or they testify on behalf of reporters' rights and any other issues that may arise related to some of the policy issues that we directly work with. So some of the things we don't do, we don't practice employment law or copyright and IP law. We've gotten quite a bit of questions about trademark and copyright issues. We don't focus too much on that, but we do know people we can put you in touch with if you do need that kind of assistance. We don't practice criminal law, but we can refer you to criminal attorneys who might be really helpful. Like I mentioned before, if you're in a situation where, one of your journalists gets arrested or you as a journalist get arrested, we can put you in touch with a criminal defense attorney who's very familiar with this kind of work. And I know some other Colorado attorneys are also very ingrained in this work too. And we don't provide, review of contracts, unfortunately related to, licensing work. Previously in my old work, I worked for CBS Paramount, and we did a lot of licensing for new media related to, if there was a TV show that had music in it and they wanted us to license that music. We don't do that kind of specific work, but we can certainly put you in touch with people who have that experience. Oh yes, and I mentioned earlier, of course, we work alongside Jeff Roberts, and Jeff has just been really a great partner to work with thus far. And, I guess I can talk briefly on how, I've worked with Jeff, for example. If there's a reporter who would reach out to Jeff and have an open records or court access issue, and would require, specific legal advice or legal assistance, I would work with Jeff and Steve as well on helping that reporter. Some of the, I guess I can talk brief, and of course collab, which is, we're always happy, and I'm excited to work and collaborate with the collab. And we'll be, when I get in town, certainly be working in their offices, I hope, at the Buell Public Media Center. So you're welcome to stop by and say hi. Hopefully I'll be able to come into the office if I'm not working remotely. So It'll be great.
We'll all get there
to see
someday.
folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, at some point. You know, one other thing I wanted to make folks aware of is about our legal services and how we provide legal services is we, at RCFP, we focus quite a bit on impact litigation. We have specific legal priorities and internal processes related to how we move forward with working with journalists and do some of the specific work we do. I can start with our intake process, which usually happens if, you know, a journalist is, you know, dealing with a potential litigation issue, like how Jeff mentioned. There's no appellate process in Colorado. So if you're denied access to any records, you would have to sue for them. We've been assisting quite a bit in that process. And usually that would involve, we would write a demand letter under the statute. It's a notice of intent to file an application and follow up after that with filing the actual complaint. But before we, you know, can write the demand letter, we usually want to work with the journalist on an engagement letter, which basically sets forth how we would represent the journalist. And we usually like to put that in place so we can put in place the attorney-client privilege, a communication, the attorney-client privilege relationship gets formed at that early stage. So we just want to make sure that we're able to correctly, you know, provide assistance and protect privilege. And the way we do that is initially with an engagement letter, which just, you know, sets forth how we can be, how we're going to move forward with representing you if the matter is to go to court. And then we have an intake memo process, which follows kind of the engagement letter process. And that intake memo process ensures that we are, you know, staying in line with our litigation priorities. It's also a way that we can ensure that some of the work we're able to assist you with it's something we'll be able to resource, because sometimes, you know, with putting the intake memo process together, it can take a little bit of time internally for us to be able to move forward and represent you. We also have like a limited letter writing process. We don't primarily write quite a bit of letters on reporters' behalf, you know, and that's for several issues. One, because we do have this internal intake process and we have quite a bit of priorities, litigation priorities that we have set forth, you know, and, you know, usually that one of those priorities is to provide legal defense for nonprofit news organizations, freelance journalists, bloggers, and journalists without institutional affiliations. And also because, you know, one of our priorities is to pursue high visible and legal reform litigation for the benefit of journalists and news organizations. So we want to make sure we're staying in line with those priorities if we were to, you know, move forward with representation or to draft a letter or to move forward with our intake process. And I'm sorry if this sounds very wonky. That was not my intent. But, you know, hopefully it provides maybe a little bit more clarity on our process. And if you all have some questions, I can certainly take some questions now.
I have one, if you guys don't mind me jumping in. Could you talk just a little bit, Rachel, about how you, on your pre-publication review process? Because that was one I wasn't aware you guys were getting involved in.
Sure. I mean, it is a little, it's a little bit limited because we partner with those 3 documentary film organizations. You know, every once in a while we may take a pre-publication matter. but it is kind of rare. Sometimes they will come through our hotline, and we'll make a consideration at that time. But primarily with pre-publication review, it's more with documentary filmmakers.
Okay. I am I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
I know FIRE, the freelance investigative reporters and editors, I'm somewhat familiar with that. It's tangentially connected to IRE. I think that they go beyond documentaries. And part of the reason I'm asking, I see Chris on the Zoom here. We had a question from some work that Tina Griego was doing with those folks about, they asked us about pre-publication review, and I didn't know to say, oh, well, maybe you should check out whether Rachel can help.
Yeah. And, I've worked on one matter, and I think RCFP kind of takes it as an case by case basis, but, and I can chat with our legal director a little bit more on this and what the parameters are. But in my experience, the work we've done is primarily at this point with documentary filmmakers, and that's how RCFP has done the work we've done so far. But I mean, if you do have that kind of a question, certainly reach out, and I can run it past our legal director and see if that's something that we could do. And Sarah Matthews from our team, she's our senior staff attorney. She does a lot of that work, as well as, the local legal initiative attorneys and some of our other attorneys, but she really heads up that area. And so I think for it to kind of flow through one person, sometimes it can be, it's just, I think it's just worked with partners a little bit easier, but that doesn't mean it's something that we would completely say no to. So I think it would just depend on the matter, and,
So it never hurts to ask is what you're telling us.
Right. Yes.
Any other questions while we have a few minutes? I know we're up against our time, but feel free to ask anything. If not, we can always follow up. You can always follow up with us.
Sure.
Okay, well, I don't see any hands or anyone in chat, although I can't see everybody on my screen yet. But like I said, if something strikes you, then please, feel free to follow up by email. And Rachel, we just want to thank you for being here, for taking the time to kind of walk us through how to work with you. And I've taken some notes here, so you'll be hearing from me, I am sure, and probably a lot of others. We're looking forward to getting you here.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to it, and happy to help in any way moving forward. And just reach out to me if you have a question, like Laura said, and I'll do my best to get back to you and answer it. So thanks.
Great. All right. Well, happy Friday, everyone.
Happy Friday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks to all of you who joined us for the first time. We're excited to have you. Take care. Bye.